All right, guys. So to me, this is the story of the day, and you're not going to see much commentary on this anywhere. And it's a shame because this is the most important issue facing the country. You'll see what I mean. So ABC News says, Supreme Court sympathetic to group convicted in New York scandal. The Supreme Court seems ready to side with a one-time top aide to ex-New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and others convicted of corruption related to an upstate economic development project dubbed the Buffalo Billion. Okay, so let me give you the cliff notes on this, and then we'll read the article here. But the general idea is, right now there's a Supreme Court case going on. And based on the questions that the Supreme Court justices were asking, it looks like they're about to allow even more corruption in our system. So there's a couple different people involved in this case. But the gist of the case is a one-time top aide to Governor Andrew Cuomo took a bribe and then delivered a favor for the person that gave them the bribe. And they're looking over this case and they're going, yeah, don't buy it. Not sure that should be illegal. And then they have these highfalutin rationalizations as to why actually what they did is totally fine and legal. And the real problem here was that, the government overreached in going after the brazen corruption. So here's what they say in ABC News. The Supreme Court seemed ready Monday to side with a one-time top aide to ex-New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and others convicted of corruption related to an upstate economic development project dubbed the Buffalo Billion. Both liberal and conservative justices seemed sympathetic to the group over approximately 2.5 hours of arguments. The cases are the latest in which the High Court could narrow the use of federal fraud charges against state and local officials, as well as people doing business with governments, even if those interactions appear to be unsavory. 2 years ago, the High Court threw out the convictions of political allies of former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie over the Bridgegate scandal scandal that involved 4 days of traffic jams on the George Washington Bridge. And in 2016, the High Court threw out the bribery conviction of former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. I don't know how many of you guys remember that story, but it was the clearest case of corruption I'd ever seen in my life. This dude was taking endless amounts of gifts from somebody who he did political favors for as governor. The Supreme Court looked at that and said, nope, doesn't violate the letter of the law, so we're going to toss out the conviction. Unbelievable stuff. In the current cases, almost the entire court signaled that prosecutors also overreached, suggesting that the government's interpretation of federal law was so broad, it would allow for conviction of skilled lobbyists and not just corrupt public officials. Okay, so let me pause here to tell you guys the astonishing arguments and points that were made by the justices. So, at one point in the questioning, one of the justices says, well, hold on now. If we uphold this conviction for corruption against this guy, technically they got him on the fraud charge, but the general gist of it is on corruption, right? Well, then why wouldn't, all lobbying be corruption? To which the response is, yes, that's the point. That's what we've been trying to say for the longest time. But they make that argument and come to the opposite conclusion. I mean, I can't be so extreme to say that all lobbying is corruption. Therefore, you got to give this guy a pass on what happened. Unbelievable. In the current cases, almost the entire court signaled that prosecutors also overreached. So we already read that part. The Buffalo Billion Development Project was intended to revitalize parts of Buffalo and other upstate areas, but the project was a multi-year black cloud over the Cuomo administration and was frequently cited by critics as proof that the Democrat failed to address chronic corruption in state government, even within his own administration. Cuomo resigned last year amid sexual harassment allegations. So, for those of you who don't know, Cuomo set up this anti-corruption commission to investigate corruption. And at some point, his anti-corruption commission started investigating Cuomo and his buddies. And then he flipped out and disbanded the anti-corruption commission. What? I don't know why that's not a bigger story. That was incredible. It's so obvious. Look over the corruption. Oh, don't look at my corruption. The justices are considering an appeal from Joseph Percoco, a former aide so close to Cuomo that he considered him like a brother, as well as Syracuse real estate executive Stephen Aiello. The court also is weighing a separate appeal in a Buffalo Billion-linked case involving Aiello, Louis Simonelli, Joseph Girardi, and Alan Caballeros, Simonelli and Girardi are developers, while Calieros had been one of Cuomo's top economic development advisors and a former president of the State University of New York Polytechnic Institute. Percoco was convicted of accepting over $300,000 from companies seeking to influence the Cuomo administration as it worked on the Buffalo Billion Project. He was ultimately sentenced to 6 years in prison, a conviction upheld on appeal. An online database of federal inmates puts his release date from custody in early 2023. Prison terms for the other men were put on hold while their appeals pay out. So, okay, again, so here's what happened. This guy Percoco, Cuomo's top aide, he took $300,000 from a company, and then when he was acting in his official capacity as a member of the state government of New York, he turned around and had Cuomo's administration help this company that gave him the $300,000. There was another instance, the other guy that they're talking about here, who the Supreme Court is looking into and hearing the case of. This was a guy who basically, how did they describe it in the other article I read? Like, rigged the bidding process for this Buffalo Billions project, where he was doing payoffs so that he would know that he would get chosen. So it was supposed to be like a bunch were putting their name in the hat in order to get picked for this project, but this guy was, paying people off to get chosen. So he rigged the bidding process to get the job, right? So now here you have two very, very clear-cut cases of corruption. What does the Supreme Court say? Well, for this guy Percoco, they say, okay, did he take the $300,000 from the company and then do favors for them? Yes. All that happened. Nobody's arguing against the facts of the case. But they say, when he took the $300,000, you're going to love this. Technically, at that moment, he was not acting in an official government capacity. He was, at that point in time, he was not the top aide to Andrew Cuomo. He wasn't in the New York state government at the time. So yeah, he took that $300,000, and then when he was Andrew Cuomo's top aide, he turned around and did favors for these people. But since he wasn't acting in an official government capacity at the time, can we really say it's corruption? And how is this any different from a standard lobbyist? How is it any different from that? How is it any different from a Wall Street firm or a defense contractor or another multinational corporation or big oil or Walmart or whatever? How's it any different from lobbyists for them giving money to politicians and then politicians end up doing them favors? How's it any different? Astonishing. So by their logic, you could work in an official government capacity, at lunchtime say, I resign for lunchtime. I'm gonna go take an hour lunch break, but I'm resigning from my government position for that hour. Go take a bribe, come back and say, I'm back now, rehire me. And then since you took the bribe technically when you weren't working for the state government, well then now there's no corruption. And now you're free and clear. This is the precedent that they're laying. This is the precedent that it looks like they're going to set up. So in other words, allow even more money in politics, even more legalized bribery. And to the point on how is it different from lobbying, it's not. But that's the fucking problem with lobbying. And that's why there's a whole bunch of political science research which talks about a better system was what's called a clean election system. No private money in elections. None. Have what's called clean elections, which is public financing of elections. There are a bunch of different ways you could set up a public financing system and a clean election system, but to have the private money, of course, is corrupting by its very nature. I mean, we just learned the other day that Donald Trump literally let Sheldon Adelson handle Middle East foreign policy for him. Why? Because he was taking money from them. Like, this stuff is amazing. And then you have, remember one of the previous Supreme Court cases on corruption, they say the money given by corporations or lobbyists or billionaires to politicians, they said, was this in the McCutcheon case or Citizens United? They go, not only is it not corruption, it is not even the appearance of corruption. That's what they said. Because they think you're all fucking born yesterday. And guess what? A lot of these judges are Federalist Society goons who've been trained for this exact moment to rationalize our system of oligarchy and kleptocracy. To say, this is the only reasonable legal interpretation, is total oligarchy and kleptocracy. And if you don't like that, you can piss the fuck off. This case is astonishing. And it looks like they're going to rule the wrong way. And even a lot of the liberal justices were playing footsies with the argument. Why? Who knows? Maybe because it's a Democratic administration that's involved in it. A Democratic state government. And so they're playing team politics and looking out for their guy. Or maybe that is their genuine interpretation of the law, but that interpretation is psychotic. They've now made it so it's damn near impossible for anything to be called corruption. The only thing that they would call corruption is if there is literally a verbal quid pro quo that's like captured on tape. So you have to say, I am ready to do corruption with you. Here is the money. Do this favor for me. Well, thank you. I would also love to engage in corruption with you. I'm on it. That's literally the only thing where they'd be like, maybe that is corruption. But as long as you're sufficiently bullshitting about it and beating around the bush and using words that, hide what you're doing, then they let you get away with it. And they have these incredible workarounds like if you resign, well then, or if you're not in government at the time, but then you do it when you are in government, that doesn't count either. Unbelievable, man. This is the shit that's destroying our politics. This is. If you were to get the money out of the system and have clean elections, then you would have politicians who more represent the interests of the people. But we haven't had that since the 1970s when the first case came in, which said money equals speech. And then those rules have been destroyed year after year after year by the Supreme Court. So, man, it's fucking wild. Horrible, horrible story. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.